Joining me now is Washington Congressman Adam Smith, the ranking member on the House Armed Services Committee. And I welcome you back. It's always good to have you, sir. So before we get to Venezuela, I do want to get your reaction to the two horrific attacks that happened overnight, one at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, the other at the Jewish holiday celebration in Sydney, Australia.
Yeah, these are terrible tragedies, and you can think of the victims, their families, everyone whose life has just been shattered by these events. And I think that's needs to be certainly our first focus is on the people who have suffered in these tragedies. And then the larger policy issue of we are in a very violent, contentious time now, and without question, we need to do more to figure out how to protect people and how to stop these attacks. And that's a wide range of issues that go into that. But I think we have to figure out as a society how to be less divisive and how we, can get along with people who see the world differently than us. It seems like we've become more and more divided, more and more intent on the idea that people who are different from us are somehow a threat to us when they're not. So we've got a lot of work to do, certainly in the U.S., but across the world, to figure out how we can get along from a diverse set of viewpoints, because these violent events happen far, far too often.
A very sage comment there. I thank you for that. So let's move now to Venezuela. House Armed Services Chair Mike Rogers said he is ending the inquiry into the September 2nd attack on an alleged drug boat where two survivors were killed in that double tap strike. You, sir, are among the lawmakers who have seen this video and said the committee should conduct a full-scale investigation into the incident. What would that entail? And what do you make of Rogers saying the Pentagon briefings that he got convinced him the strike was legal?
Well, that's interesting because since Chairman Rogers said that, he's also said that he wants to hear from the specific lawyer who gave the advice on that second strike. So it doesn't seem like Mike actually thinks the investigation is over either. There are more answers that he wants. And what a further investigation would look like is a deep dive into, first of all, the chain of command. How were these decisions made? What were the rules of engagement? Who gave them? And how did that flow down? And then the specific decisions around this strike. And that is a large number of people who are involved in that. Is there anything documented, written down with what the rules of engagement should have been? We want to see that, and we want to talk to the people who are involved in the decision making. So that's on that strike, but it goes way beyond that strike. There is no congressional authorization for the war that the president is currently waging in Latin America. And he has not adequately explained what the purpose of that is. And your setup did a pretty good job of explaining the contradictions here. Are we trying to stop drugs? If so, why are we pardoning drug dealers? Is this more about regime change in Venezuela? And if that's the case, that has massive implications in terms of our policy going forward. And again, the lack of authorization for doing it. And then even on the question of how do we deal with the very real problem of drug abuse in the United States of America, is blowing up a few dozen boats with cocaine on them in Latin America really going to have a dramatic impact on that? I have my doubts. And then also, does the rule of law matter? Have we decided that we are going to have the death penalty for drug dealers and that there's going to be no due process, no probable cause? President Trump is simply going to be judge, jury, and executioner on that. I think all of those things are problematic, and this White House and this Department of Defense have not adequately explained what they're doing, where it's going, or what the real policy behind it is.
And in fact, Democratic members of the Gang of Eight have called on Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to publicly release the full unedited video of the strike after Hegseth's refusal to do so. So without revealing any classified details, I'm not going to ask that of you, but what about what you did see makes you believe the American people need to see this footage for themselves?
Yeah, well, first of all, there's so many Republicans who have seen this footage who are portraying it in a very inaccurate way. And that's a generous way for me to put that description. I mean, you've got two people clinging to a capsized boat, a piece of a capsized boat. The bow of the boat is above water. How much of the boat remains below water is impossible to say, but that same boat was struck pretty severely and caught on fire and capsized. They are not armed. They have no communications devices. We know there's no ship or no one within hundreds of miles of where they are at. So they're not trying to tip the boat back over and complete their mission or get back in the fight, as was described. So I think given the fact that there have been what I feel are some dishonest portrayals of what was on that video, I think the American people ought to be able to see for themselves. And there's no legitimate reason for not releasing this video. They've already released, what, 15, 20 of these videos? Now, the full video of this contact is 5.5 hours. I don't expect them to release all 5.5 hours. There may well be some sensitive stuff in there somewhere, but the strike itself is not classified, nothing sensitive, not going to jeopardize operations in any way. They should release it. In my opinion, the only reason they're not releasing it is they know if the public sees it, it will make it clear that they are not being honest about what happened.
Washington Congressman Adam Smith, thank you, sir, for joining us. We'll look forward to seeing you again. The horror on Bondi Beach and the ripple effects being felt in Jerusalem next.